Let's say the broadcast is live. Are you ready?
And we can wait. We can wait for some people to come on in and
Okay.
have some conversation. But you let me know. I'm an open book tonight. So you brought me on here. I ready to go. So throw some questions at me. Hopefully we can get the viewers or the listeners can throw some questions.
Okay.
So we'll talk some real estate tonight. I'm excited.
I'm excited. So let's go wait a little bit to see people pop in. How do I say that? Okay, I think we can start now. Hi, Jacob. I hope you are doing well, and then thank you so much for taking your time to be with me today to talk about investment into mixed-use property. I really appreciate that. So I will let you introduce yourself first to our people right there.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and we can, as people come in, because I know, it always is a slow trickle, and then the hundreds of thousands start joining in a little bit later on. So if we need to recap at any point, you let me know, because you can see how many thousands are watching, and I always love it. So just a little introduction, I guess. So my name is Jacob Campanaro. I'm VP of multifamily and mixed use sales with the REC team. So what does that mean? Well, essentially, I focus solely on investment real estate, and in the multifamily or mixed use realm. So anything that would be, just to put it simply, anything that would be, 5 doors, 5 units and more is what I really focus on. And we have our own little team going. So we have about 5-6 realtors that work with us, and that's the bread and butter. So that's what I like to focus on.
Excellent. Thank you so much for this introduction. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and then people who are watching us today, if you have any question, please feel free to comment, and it will be our pleasure to answer all your questions. Today is the day to get all the things that you need to have, okay? So, Jacob, what is the mixed-use property? What do we call mixed-use property?
Yes, good question. So, and I know we were talking about this just before we hopped on, but there's so many different terminologies and words you can call this type of real estate. For example, we'll be talking about mixed use. We'll be talking about multifamily, multi-residential, commercial. Listeners and the viewers, we're talking about the same thing here. And that is, again, it's going to be 5 units and more of multifamily or multiple residential units. And then just as a side note, it can also include like you look in Toronto on typical street, you'll see a retail shop on the bottom, and then you'll see some residential units above. Indeed. Well, even if it's just, one retail and one residential, we're still considering that a mixed use commercial transaction.
So even though it's just one retail and then one commercial below, one commercial or retail or in the residential is considered as a commercial unit.
Correct. Yes.
So in that case, somebody who wants the first-time home buyer, because as a residential one, the government give you sometimes the first-time home buyer power to put just 5% down payment.
Yeah.
So somebody who want to buy that type of property for themselves for the first time, will it be the 5% or the 20% for the commercial?
So yeah, unfortunately, with a mixed use, it is going to be considered commercial, right? It's because it has that storefront.
Okay.
That's where the government and the mortgage people, they're all going to look at it and go, well, no, that's going to be closer to 25% And in some cases, with the retail portion could even be as high as 35% down.
35% down. Okay.
So it's important to pick and choose, right? And that's why sometimes even first-time investors, I say, go big or go home. Let's look at 6-7 units. If you can manage one, it's just more units under one roof.
No, that's true. That's totally true. Okay, that one I wanna go deep into it. Let's go.
Let's do it.
Go big or go home.
Yeah.
So my other question is, so you mentioned a little bit about different type of mixed uses. You mentioned about like more than five units, more than the one that is mixed with retail. Can you give us more details? Because somebody who have never invested into real estate, they will be confused. What is a multifamily? What is mixed use property?
Yeah. So and just we'll start simple and then we'll dive into a little bit more. So at the simplest terms of things, a multifamily commercial building. When I say that, most people think of what you consider, a brick flat roof building, right? And that is the quintessential multifamily building, and that's what a lot of investors look for, because it offers economy of scale, right? It offers multiple units under one roof.
Okay.
I deal with investors who, either are first-time buyers or people who have hundreds of units, but all of them or most of them are going to be single family or duplex, triplex. So in that residential realm, and once we graduate to the commercial side of things, a lot changes more so with the financing.
The financing,
and that's where my team and I we can assist and help, and we have the financiers, we have the teams that can come in and assist with that transition, let's call it. So that's your typical building, right? We also do sales all the way up to 100 units, 200 units, and large commercial multifamily buildings, and these are still all just residential, all just multifamily rental units. And we have clients that look for product like that, funds and different groups of investors who are looking for something a little larger. And then, like we mentioned earlier, kind of that mixed use or that retail portion. We have a few people on our team who work with commercial residential mix. So that could be one retail, two retail, it could be a whole plaza with a few residential units as well. Okay. And each of these are going to work for different investors. So I'm not going to sit here and say one's better than the other, one's easier or one's harder. It really boils down to what the investor's looking for. And that's something that, Uma, just as well as I do on the REC team, that, when we talk with clients and bring them in, I'm not going to call myself a wealth management consultant, but, I like to find out more about the client than just, hey, client, what do you want to buy? Right. And I think that's why the REC team has that, that reputation and that success rate, because we say, I sit down with my clients just like you would and say, okay, you have your home, you have a little bit of cash in the bank, and your goal is to retire. Is it to substitute your income? And we hear every different story, every different walk of life. And from there, I can then say, hey, let's just go find that brick 6-unit, 7-unit, 10-unit building. It's, management is a bit easier. If you already own a condo with one tenant, well, it's just 7 tenants. Look at it as 7 condo units. But one furnace, one roof for maintenance. So it saves maintenance costs. It's nice because you can, if one tenant leaves, if 2 tenants leave, you're not going to lose money, right? Like with a condo, if your tenant leaves, it's, oh my gosh, okay, now I have to pay my monthly fees on the condo. until I find a new tenant. And with a multifamily building, what's nice, and this is one of the biggest things I think that commercial multifamily has to offer, is we can lose 2-3 tenants. And while we're looking for more tenants, we're still not going to be cash flow. We can still break even, or we can still even be cash flow positive, because we have another 6-7 people still paying rent in that building. And that's the most important part of that.
Sorry, that is the most important part indeed. That's why people are looking to invest into family units.
Yeah.
My other question for you, Jacob, is with the everything going on in Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
From you, where is the best place to purchase a mixed use property, and what are the places that you see that they have more potential of growth,
Right.
Room from growth in Ontario?
Yeah. So and that's a very interesting question. It's a question I get almost daily from investors, and I like that. So again, so the short and sweet of it, let me give you that first. So if you just came to me and said, no, I'm not even looking to invest, but just let me know where the best market is. I'm gonna say you want to look around the GTA, an hour outside of the GTA. Let's call that Hamilton, right? For example, and anybody who's looking to invest has been reading the articles. Hamilton, number one city to invest in Ontario, number one city in Canada, best growth, and we've seen that time over time now this year. But it's not the only spot, right? It's not the only spot, and so others just to consider would be look at the Barrie and Orillia corridor, the Innisville corridor, right? So now we're kind of going north of the city. And that's a fantastic market as well. I know a lot of my clients live in Markham, Vaughan, up that way, North York. And, they said they would rather drive 2 hours north than try to beat traffic through the city to go invest in Hamilton. So yes, it's I'll give you the short and sweet of it, but at the same time, it is tailored to each investor.
Okay.
Another thing I like to ask my investors is, do you have a reason for going there other than your income property, right? Do you have an aunt that lives in Barrie? Do you have a mom or a brother or a sister or a friend that lives in Hamilton? Because if it's something you're gonna go do that trip anyways, well, perfect. Now you can stop by and check on your property as well, and make that trip more efficient.
That is totally true. And then having a reason to stop by can be a more motivation, source of motivation to go see your property.
Yes.
But this thing, if I'm gonna be an advocate for new investor,
Yep.
so because new investor, they usually don't have that cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of cash flow to invest. So they're looking for places where it's affordable, but they can still get those multi-usage units. So beside Barrie right now, I kind of feel like he's getting to a level where you have to have some million in your bank account.
Yes. And that's perfect, actually, because that was what I wanted to say. If you're reading the newspapers, it's Hamilton, Barrie. It's going the other way. You can look at Cobourg, Oshawa, Ajax, right? All those markets are very hot, but everybody and their mother sees that, right? Everybody reads the newspaper. Everybody looks on Facebook and goes, "Oh, Hamilton, we have to invest in Hamilton," or Barrie. And you're right, because it's now those markets are becoming inflated almost, where because everybody's pushing those markets, they're becoming the most expensive markets, or at least the second most expensive outside of the GTA.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question there is, I say, yes, a lot of my newer investors that are looking for cash flow, who don't have $1 million sitting in the bank account, I say, let's look at tertiary markets.
Tertiary market, okay.
Yes. So tertiary markets are going to be considered smaller towns. Let's call it 2.5 to 3 hours outside of the GTA. So, for example, a great example of that is Woodstock. Okay, Woodstock, Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
Orillia It used to be a tertiary market. It's starting to get pretty hot there. So you can, 2 weeks ago, I went up to, Perry Sound, which is just north of Aurelia. You keep going, you're going to run into Perry Sound. So it's these smaller markets, right?
Okay.
Fergus, for example, if we want to go that direction. So smaller towns that don't come to mind right away, but that have a very healthy population, that have a very healthy job market, or bedroom towns, which are considered, you live there, but you commute to somewhere else.
So, okay, a bedroom town.
Bedroom town.
Guys, I hope you know that one from experts.
Yeah.
If you're looking for a bedroom town or somewhere.
So, for example, we look at Brantford. Brantford's a great market.
Okay.
It's becoming a very hot, very popular market. So my instant thought is, okay, well, what's surrounding Brantford, right? Because all those tenants that used to live in Brantford now can't afford it, are going to have to go somewhere. And, if you want to visualize it, drop a pebble into a pond and there's going to be ripples, right? And the ripples will grow and grow. And let's just find where that next ripple's going, and then go invest there. And maybe you're thinking going, oh my gosh, well, no one's talking about that town, or it's pretty small. I don't know. I'm telling you, Ontario growth and the immigration and what's happening, it's going to expand, and it has to. So that's been my personal investment strategy since day one, has always been find the next town that's going to grow and invest there. Well, try to invest there first, right? So, try to be the first guy there, or the first woman there.
So if I kind of understand your strategy a little bit, it's like looking at the market. Mm-hmm. If you're seeing a growing area or a growing city, just look maybe 1 hour around that city.
Yeah.
And then trying to find a property over there.
Exactly. Or even half an hour, right? You don't need to go that far. So it's interesting, right? And I think that's the, for investors that are starting out, okay, who don't have a ton of cash, that want to find something to cash flow, that's my first recommendation, is don't try to beat, the masses out and start.
Hello, Jacob. I think we are facing, guys. But in the meantime, that Jacob will be coming back to online. What you just mentioned is really, really important as well. Jacob, can you hear me now?
I can. Sorry, I think I froze.
You are back. Okay. So yes, you are still talking about not trying to beat.
Beat the crowds, right? There's everybody's reading the newspaper and just try to think ahead of that. And that's what some of the biggest groups and most successful investors I know have done, right? They've been the first to that smaller town that now has become the big town.
Big town. And then that's Ontario is growing too rapid because of it's crazy. So my other question is, you kind of touched it a little bit, but I'm going to ask you to see if you have more information on it. Example, what are the key factors to determine if it's a good investment? Beside the population growth, the job growth, is there any other thing that somebody has to look at or watch to see if they have how is the investment will be growth?
Yeah. So there's multiple factors, and I like to when I'm sitting with clients and I'm just we're having a conversation like you were a client, Umu, is we want to start at a high 10,000 foot level, let's call it, right? So which markets do we want to invest in? Where do you want to drive? Where are you comfortable driving? Then we're going to find our radius to say, okay, well, you live in Markham, for example. Let's just use that. Okay. You want to drive an hour from Markham, no more, right? So that's our radius. So now that I know where we're looking and where you're comfortable looking, we're going to look at specific markets and specific towns for, like you said, right? Job, what's the population? What's the jobs in the area? What's the, where are people commuting? Why are they living there? Right. And not to say that small towns don't have a strategy as well. And I'll touch on that in a little bit.
Okay.
But So once we find the area, find the town we are comfortable with, for example, let's just go back to Aurelia because that was my most recent purchase we did was there.
Okay.
Okay. So Aurelia is a fast growing town. It used to be a little bit rough around the edges, but it's quickly becoming a hot spot to invest. And that's because everybody from Barrie and, anybody who's in Barrie or knows of Barrie you might as well buy in Toronto. It's almost the same pricing these days, marginally. But so everyone who used to rent in Barrie has now said, okay, where do I go? I'm going to go to Aurelia. So they've moved up. So we have this big rental population in Aurelia. And that's what I like to see. I'm not necessarily going to say you have to own, the Ritz Hotel. You don't have to have the nicest unit in town. You want to find something in the middle of the road, right? For the renting population. Because you're always safe with that. Recession, you're still safe with that. People need to live. So very solid investment there. And then once we find that, it boils down to the actual property itself.
Okay.
Right? We're gonna start by quickly looking at the property. At least this is my process. I look at the property. Okay, 5 units, 6 units, great. So it's commercial. We need a commercial mortgage for this. We're gonna look at the structure itself. Is it concrete? Is it wood? Because those things weigh into purchase price. Right? A concrete brick building is going to last longer than a stick frame building, or it's going to need less maintenance and upkeep.
Okay.
Right. And we're getting into the weeds here, but and then
because those are the details I'm curious about. So
yeah,
if somebody is buying a concrete, so the price will be a little bit expensive than somebody who's buying wood.
It should. It should. In this market, anything goes. I half the time I'm blown away, but it should, right? So a brick and concrete building is, they're like a bomb shelter. It's very solid, and you know what? They're going to last for a long time, and there's going to be less maintenance and upkeep needed.
Okay.
So that's what a lot of people look for. If it's stick frame, I'm not saying it's bad. I own a ton of stick frame. My clients do, meaning that it's built out of wood.
Okay.
It's just when you're doing your numbers, you have to keep in mind, okay, maintenance is going to be a little bit more on this because the wood naturally degrades quicker than concrete. It's very simple. So that's a factor. I like to factor that in. And then it boils down to obviously the most important thing, which is going to be income and expenses. Like every investment. What is the income? How do we prove it? And what are the expenses and how do we prove it? So when I offer on buildings, I always ask for, the first thing I ask for is the lease agreements, right? I'm sure you've been there as well, Umu, where the agent, the listing realtor, the listing agent says, well, here's my rent roll, and it's on the back of a napkin with a pen. And you're like, what? I need more than this. I need to prove it.
I need the proof, yeah.
Yes.
Because you have to show to your client that, this is how it is.
Bank, right? Your client and the bank, because the bank's not going to lend if they don't have the lease agreements. So absolutely 100%, I need the lease agreements. If you don't have lease agreements, then I need a tenant acknowledgement.
Okay.
Right? Which is basically a summarized lease agreement that the tenant signs. Right? So I can prove my income.
Okay.
And I can show what the income is. Now we work on the expenses. So again, in my offers, I have a big list of what we call deliverables. So once our offer is accepted, I want to see within 2-3 days a year's worth of tax.
Okay.
12 months utility, so hydro, gas, and water. An insurance bill, if you have it, or an insurance statement. And that's not so important because you can always call your own insurer and ask. And then we're going to check. So then we know what the income, what the expenses are.
Okay.
Right? Simplified. And there's other factors that come into effect, and vacancy rates and maintenance and management, which vary per town and per building. And then we're going to see what our numbers are, right? We're going to have an NOI, or a net operating income, which we can then apply that to the building and see, hey, where does our offer make sense?
Okay.
Right? they're asking, you know, and especially in today's market where they're asking usually below what they get, right? So they're asking, you know, 900, but you and I know based on the NOI, the net operating income, that, hey, this building could actually go upwards of 1.3 million. And that's how you get your numbers. That's how you win those bid wars, is you run your numbers, you know your numbers, and you're confident to make the offer where it counts.
That's really important, and I mentioned that one to most of my clients. Don't just look at the listing price, because it's almost nothing right nowadays. It's just a number they just put to attract you.
Exactly. and then when you say that, and then they go, but Umu, what's the price then? Right? What do I offer? And it's nice with commercial, because you can say, well, you know, Mr. Client, Mrs. Client, this is where you're going to cash flow. This is where you're going to break even. And at this number is where we're going to start losing money. So I'm going to let you pay up to break even and not a penny more. Because we can always work on it to start getting it to cash flow again in the future. And if it wants to go negative cash flow, well, then thank you very much. We'll let the next guy take the negative cash flow. We'll go look for the next one, you know. But usually if you know your numbers and you're confident with the building, they usually end up selling, at least in this market, somewhere around that break-even point, which at the end of the day is perfect, because you're still getting appreciation and you're still getting principal pay down. And within 6 months, we'll do a few rental increases that are due, and all of a sudden you're cash flowing again. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. It's a per building basis.
Is there any tool that somebody that is is new on this one can use to calculate, and then, or to figure out a little bit, come back to the professional after that?
Of course. So I offer this when I do my podcasts, and I can offer it to anybody who's listening as well. So we have a complimentary cash flow analyzer, or a performa is what I call it.
Okay.
And it's an Excel document. We've made it very friendly for everybody to use, whether you're looking at a 200 unit building for 30 million or a $500,000 duplex, and anything in between. So it's self-explanatory. It says fill in the blue cells, and you go through and you put in your numbers where the blue is.
Well,
and it spits out your cash flow and what you're looking at. Yeah.
That would be great. And then I think for those who are registered for this webinar, we will share that complimentary with them, with Jacob permission.
You got it. I'll send you a copy after this, and then you can send it out or whatever you need to do with it. Yeah.
Wonderful. That's great. So for somebody who wants to invest into mixed use property, what do they need to have before coming to you?
Yes. So good question. So with commercial, and we'll talk about commercial financing, because that's where this question is going to lead.
Okay.
So with commercial, there's no pre-approval, right? I always recommend you speak with a mortgage broker. Let's learn about the client, right?
Okay.
Let's learn about what's your net worth. So it's very similar to residential. I want to know what you own currently, you know, how much cash you have, or what's your strategy to purchase, right? And then we'll go to a mortgage broker just to get familiar with the process. But there's no pre-approval with commercial, which is very interesting. So it's up to myself and the client and the mortgage broker to say, well, you know, we can afford roughly around here, around that number, around this number. And the reason behind that is because the commercial mortgages are based on the property.
Okay.
More on the property than the buyer, right? So it's not with a residential. They're going to say, okay, what's your income and your expenses,
Yes.
right? And do you have enough cash flow at the end of the day to buy this property and pay the mortgage, right? And they want to see that through your credit statement. Do you have a car loan? How much do you make from work? And that's what they're doing. They're looking at your income and expenses. With a commercial property, they're going to look at the property's income and expenses, right? What is the property making? What is the property spending? And will the property carry itself, right? What they look at for the client more so is does the client pay their bills? How's the client's credit, right? They want to make sure that if they lend the money to the building and to the client, obviously they're not going to run the building into the ground by mismanagement or not paying their bills. But it does offer some freedom for people who might not get a typical residential mortgage. So, long story short, what am I looking for when you come meet with me? Well, I'd like to see, basically my top questions are, okay, well, what are you looking to purchase? Why are you looking to purchase?
Okay.
How much capital do you have to purchase? Because that's going to be the biggest factor on what we're looking at to buy.
So they have to bring the information about the down payment that they
correct.
have saved.
That's correct, right?
Okay.
Because although we're looking at the building more so than the buyer, we're also putting down 25 to 35% on the down payment.
Okay.
Right. So you have to just understand that and know that coming into the purchase. But other than that, it's really, let's have a conversation, right? And let's talk about what and why. And then at that point we can decide, right? Because there's, as well as I do, you can always tap into your personal residence. We can refinance your put a second mortgage on it, or tap into some equity elsewhere, right? So it's not that you have to have $1 million in the bank,
Okay.
but where can we pull this cash to put the money down?
Oh, so you have to have at least a certain list of places or asset that you can use.
You got it. So that's part of my questions is just, what else do you own, right? Do you have other income properties, your personal residence? A lot of our investors come to us and say, well, I don't own anything, but I have a house. I've owned it for, 20 years. Maybe there's some equity there. And I go, maybe, oh my gosh. And then we look at it and, they're sitting on $500,000, $600,000 of equity in their home. And I go, you can buy 6 buildings with this. Let's go shopping, right? Like that
is amazing.
Yeah. And so those are my favorite stories, right? Where I'm like, yes, okay, we're good.
Yes. Don't sit on the money, invest it. Inflation is going high. The money that you have today is kind of like most worth it nothing tomorrow.
Exactly.
So just a quick, I'm gonna go through a quick question that I usually get into from people. So how important is the zoning when investing into mixed use property?
Yes. So I love this question. I know you asked it to me earlier before we started the call, and I thought it was an amazing question because it gets overlooked a lot of the time. I think my answer to you was, zoning is not the fun and exciting part of buying real estate. It's quite dry. It's sometimes difficult to understand, but it is very important, and it's important for 2 different reasons.
Okay.
The first reason is because we need to make sure the property you're buying is zoned for its current use, right? With residential, 99.9% of the time, the home is zoned residential, right? And you're good. You're buying a residential home. You're safe. With commercial properties, right? What we run into a lot in the scenario is, okay, so on MLS, they're advertising a 5-unit building.
Okay.
Or let's say a 10-unit building, just to make sure it's commercial. So it's a 10-unit building. And you go, great, 10 units, the income's awesome. And then you go to the city, which is part of my process. I always talk to the city and I say, hey, I'm looking at buying 123 somewhere street. It's a 10-unit building. Can you just confirm that this is recognized as a 10-unit building? Because the zoning only shows it as, or the zoning states it's a 4-plex or a 5-plex, or, maybe that's extreme, but, the zoning allows 9 units, but they're saying it's a 10-unit building.
Okay.
And you can call the city and one of 2 things. So the city will either right on the phone let you know and say, yes, this is recognized as a 10-unit. Or they might say you have to acquire what's like a zoning verification certificate.
Okay.
So a zoning verification certificate, anywhere from $10 to $100, depending on where you're buying. and it will be a letter, a formal letter from the city stating, the city of Aurelia recognizes this building as a 10-unit building, or they recognize it as a legal non-conforming 10-plex.
Okay.
And that's very important.
Not to cut you here, because
Please.
when you say illegal zoning, some people who don't know about it. So can you explain a little bit that part, the last part?
Yeah. So when you're looking at the zoning with commercial, there's different zones. So with commercial multifamily, it's usually an R for residential. So you'll see something like an R1, an R2, an R3, an R4 zone, right? R1 is going to be single family residential. And this is very blanket statement. Every municipality is a little different. But just for argument's sake, an R1 is a home, residential detached home. R2 is maybe a duplex, a triplex, 4 units perhaps. R3 can now start being an apartment building. So now we're looking at 6, 7 units, and R4 is usually high density. So 100 units, multi-unit building. But in these smaller towns like Aurelia, perhaps, just because that's been our case study today,
Yes.
The building we recently bought, actually, and I'm not going to give addresses or anything, but it was zoned R2.
Okay.
But it was a 8-unit building, right? So when I read the zoning, it's very easy. I went on to cityofaurelia.com, read the zoning, and it's sitting there, and it says, well, R2 is for a duplex, triplex, or fourplex, and we're buying 8. So I went, well, that's right off the bat, that's a red flag, because it's operating as it is. That's totally fine, and maybe the city will turn a blind eye to it,
Okay.
and just because they need rental, but that's going to cause issues with mortgages and with insurance and with selling it down the road. Because if we're catching it now, when you go to sell it, the buyer's going to catch it as well.
That's true.
So, I called the city, we had a conversation, and it did end up being what's considered legal non-conforming.
Okay.
So meaning when the building was built in 70 something, it was considered a different zone. It was considered an R3 zone, which allows an 8-unit building. Okay. But over the years, since 71, 72, the city's changed these neighborhoods. This became a residential neighborhood, but this building has always been an 8-unit building from day one. And they can't change the use of the building. They can't come to the owner and say, well, it's not an apartment anymore. You have to be a house now. They're not going to do that. So they'll put a status, which is legal, right? So the city considers it legal. They're fine with it, but it's a non-conforming use, meaning it does not fit the zoning. And that's very common. Like I run into that probably 1 out of 4 deals I do.
Okay.
So it's important to go through these steps.
That is really important, and thank you for explaining. If anyone has a question, please drop it on the comment box, and we're gonna get back to that. My other question is how to find a mixed-use property in this demanding market, competitive. How, because everything is not on the MLS.
Yes.
Right. How do you find those property?
Yeah. So it's tough in this market. It is. I don't want to sugarcoat it and say, oh, come work with me, I have hundreds of them, because that's just not the truth. For every 5 homes or every 10 homes, maybe there's 1 apartment building that goes for sale, right? So just, what the residential market is like. So times that by 5 or 10 or whatever you want, right? So it's a very difficult market to invest in. Yes, the MLS is a great resource. Buildings do come up, not as frequently as residential, but they do come up. And when they do, in this market, there's naturally a bit of a bid war or multiple offer situation. Mm-hmm. And this is going to sound like a plug or a shameless plug here, but when you're dealing with commercial real estate, that's why it's so important to work with a realtor or a commercial realtor, because they're going to have access to off market or or potentially pseudo off market, maybe something that hasn't hit MLS yet, because people like me and my teammates, when we're not out on showings, we're making phone calls and we're having lunches with landlords. Right? We're talking, we're meeting with people, and it's all about relationship and saying, okay, well, if Bob has that building and Frank has this building, great. So I can take these buyers. And it's a little bit more about relationship building in the commercial world. So it's important to work with a commercial broker, because we're going to have access to certain buildings that maybe don't come up on MLS. Right now we're working on 2 different buildings that are off market. And the only way to get access to them is to work with our team, or someone that works with our team, right? I'm not saying you have to work with me, but a commercial broker.
Indeed. So if you have any question, we are here to help on that case.
Yeah.
My other question is, how do we manage a mixed use property? Somebody who have never done it, how do you manage it?
Yep.
Do you hire a property management, or do you do by yourself, or do you mix something together?
Yep. Yeah. And all 3 are correct. So all 3 are correct. So there's many different ways to manage these buildings. Just like residential, you can always manage it yourself, right? If it's in your backyard, if it's down the road, if it's in your city, and you feel confident to manage it and comfortable dealing with tenants, dealing with, issues like that, then I say go for it, because you're going to save 5, 6, 7% on your income. But personally, I don't manage any of my buildings. Most of my clients don't manage their buildings, because we know that, okay, so we either got to spend our Saturdays cutting the grass, or you can spend your Saturday looking for another building, right? So it's all about time management and what is your time worth. And if you live that lifestyle where you feel that you can manage and go look for another building, then do it, right? I'm not going to turn you away from that. I think it's an amazing experience. You'll learn a lot about tenants. You'll learn a lot about people, maintenance, and everything to do with those buildings. And I think it's important that all investors at some point in their career manage their own building or house or whatever it is, to learn that skill. But if you're busy, like most people these days, right, working your 9 to 5, then you get home, then you got the dog and the kids and the food, and you're like, okay, well, how the heck am I going to go cut the grass now? Or the tenant calls because the light bulb went out, or the leaky toilet at 2 a.m. You don't want those calls. And that's where I personally feel a property management company or a property manager is worth every penny. Take my 5%, take my 6%, because it's worth so much more to have a good night's sleep than worrying about my tenants calling me for issues, and caring about the tenants, right? The property manager is going to have somebody full time to go there and check on the tenants. If the toilet does break, they're going to go, where I can't get there immediately. Maybe I'm with a client, maybe I'm busy. So I personally believe in property managers through and through. Or you can do the hybrid option, which you mentioned, or both, right?
Okay.
Which, again, a lot of investors do, which is hiring a site super or something of that nature, right? So someone who's not a property manager, but will check on the property, cut the grass. Maybe they live in the building, right? A really good trick is to talk to your tenants and say, hey, Bob in unit 203, I can give you an extra couple $100 a week if you want to manage the property for me, right? Pick up the checks when the checks are due. Make sure the garbage cans are in at the end of the end of Monday night or Tuesday, whenever your garbage is. Make sure the lawn's getting cut, and just clean up the hallways every once in a while, right? If there's garbage, clean it up, and I'll give you some money. And that's an awesome method to look into as well, if you trust your tenants, and saves you a lot of money. Yes, you're still going to have to do a little bit of work personally, but all the stuff you don't want to get up at 6 a.m. and go do is going to be taken care of.
Indeed, you don't want to be in the middle of your sleep and
No.
then call to come change the toilet is not working.
The smoke alarm battery's out, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, because technically that actually is a landlord responsibility, right? So yes, if you have good tenants, maybe they'll change it for you, but a beeping smoke alarm at 10 o'clock at night, now you got to drive an hour to go change it. No, thank you.
No, it doesn't make sense. So, lastly, maybe I have a question that I have to ask you as well. But lastly, on my question board is, what are your 5 pieces of advice that you can give to somebody who want to invest into mixed use property or who have never invested?
Yep.
How to invest?
Yes. So I think number one, and probably the most important, is knowledge.
Okay.
Just like everything, right? Become knowledgeable about the topic, whether that's reading books. If you don't like reading, you can listen to podcasts. You can listen to books on audio tape. I'm not a big reader, so I'm always listening to podcasts when I'm driving to work or to meetings. And there's a few good ones, which again, I'll give to you, Amu, and you can maybe put them in the caption when you send out the performa.
Oh, yeah.
But listen to podcasts. You can listen to stories, good stories, bad stories. Once you know that, I guess number 2 is market knowledge. So again, kind of knowledge, but learn about the markets, right? Understand where you want to invest. It's so important. Like, yes, you can come to me with no knowledge whatsoever, and yes, I will help you. Just like Umu, you're going to help people as well through their journeys, and that's what we're here for, realtors. That's why we get paid. But I think it makes the buyer and my job and their job a little easier if they come in knowledgeable about the product, right? And once we find it, do the sale, close it, it's still now on to that buyer to manage and properly run that building, right? So again, knowledge on that front, and then market knowledge, right? Where do you want to invest? How do you want to invest? Where are we driving to invest? I love it when clients come to me and say, hey, I know I'm not going to drive 4 hours to go invest, so please find me something within an hour from my house. All right. Perfect. I'll do that. Or the opposite, right? Hey, go find something 6 hours away. I'm going to use a property manager anyways. I don't care. So know about the market. And then the actual investment side. So number 3 is know your own investments, right? Okay. Know where your cash is going to come from. Speak with your accountant, speak with your lawyer, speak with your mortgage broker, right? Try to get all the facts together. And I'm trying to tell you how to do this without even using me, right? What would I do if I wasn't a realtor or knew anything, right? Is I would speak with the professionals around me.
And usually, right? It's free for buyers to talk to them.
Yeah, mortgage brokers, yep, free to speak to. Accountants, if you have a good one, free to speak to. Lawyers, I don't know, they're going to charge you, but you can get all this. You can get a ton of knowledge and a ton of understanding about that, before you even start to look for investing. It's another one, and I know I'm not giving you 5. I'm going to give you probably 100 here, but back to your zoning question, understand the zoning of your municipalities you want to invest in. For example, and I forgot to say this when we were talking about zoning, so let me jump around a little bit, but okay. Really good story, and I'll give it quickly because I know we might be running out of time, but so a good friend / client of mine purchased in a smaller town, southwestern Ontario, and there was this building sitting on the market for, I don't know, 3 months, not selling, right? In such a hot market. And it was because it was mostly office commercial, right? Office commercial in a small town, excuse me. Not exactly the best investment today, right? It's kind of a slow market for that. But he found in the zoning, he actually did a very deep dive into the zoning, and he found a little bit of a loophole there where it was a mixed use zoning. So retail with commercial with residential up top. But it said that the only portion of that building that needed to be commercial was the street front. Well, it just so happened that building was on a little sliver of street front. So he took a 10,000 square foot commercial building and converted it all to residential. And he has one little small commercial unit in there, which his property manager operates out of or something. Totally legal. The city was happy to do it. Right. And he's going to make an amazing investment and a great return off of that property, which so many people must have overlooked while it sat on the market for 6 months or 5 months.
Yeah. And then you can negotiate the deal.
And they got it for pennies because it was an older office that no one wanted because they couldn't find any tenants. So super important to go back to that is the zoning, right? Learn your zoning. So let's chalk up numbers 1, 2, and 3 to just knowledge, right? Become knowledgeable, try to understand the markets as best you can.
Okay.
The next is connect yourself with the right team, the right people. Okay. So that's a property manager, right? And if you don't know where to find a property manager, well, call your realtor, right? I will refer you to property managers for free. Just call me. Let's have a conversation. And a contractor, right? So if your tenant decides to leave, which is a good thing in this market, we can now renovate. So instead of then having a unit vacant for 6 months while you're trying to find a contractor and getting quotes and doing this and doing that, start now, right? Make some phone calls, try to make some relationships with your contractors. And the same thing goes for, your handyman. If you just need a toilet needs to be fixed, things like that. So build that team,
okay,
right? Build that team. And the last one, and that's it. And then I'll let you talk, is, networking, right? So you asked me, well, if you can't find buildings on MLS, where can you find buildings? And yes, you can work with a realtor because I network and that's what I do pretty much 9 to 5, but you can also network yourself. Nothing stops the buyers from doing that. For example, if you want to invest in Hamilton, there's the Facebook group, Greater Hamilton Investment Group, right? The names are not very creative. They're quite simple to find, right? I'm sure there's a Toronto investment group, a Barrie investment group, and it's just people on Facebook. And sometimes they do meetups in person where, you can talk with like-minded people, newer investors, seasoned investors, but a lot of trading happens there, right? The investor who has 100 buildings says, well, I'm going to sell one. I wonder if anybody here tonight wants to buy one, right? And if you're ready to go, it's the perfect opportunity. So I've done a lot of business at meetups, investors, meetups, and then you can take that to the next level and go to group, paid investor groups, right? Because then you'll start looking at your Keyspire, your Rain, your Right Club, all of these more structured investor meetups, but not necessarily. You don't have to do that.
That is for all those information. I was taking notes all the time.
Okay.
Because they're really, really important.
Yeah.
My last question is, that wasn't in my list, but you mentioned it today. You say you're going to talk about small town strategy. Small town strategy.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Yes. So, and thank you for bringing me back, because I know I mentioned I was going to talk about that. So in smaller towns, there's many options, right? Because like I mentioned, my first case was, let's go find that strong small town, that good population, or a bedroom town. But that's not necessarily the town where you're going to be able to afford in, right? So a lot of investors I'm working with right now are saying, well, why don't we go north? Let's look in Northern Ontario, right? And it's like that 5 years ago, no one was going there, right? And we're talking quite far north, 3-4 hours north. And there's towns, like there's a lot of these towns up there, which are supplied on logging or mining, which are one employment towns, okay. Meaning there's only one job source. Everybody there works at the factory, right? And that for a lot of investors is very scary. So it keeps people away from investing in these towns. Well, you can always think of a different strategy for those towns. So if I'm buying in, for example, a logging town, right? And we know, hey, it's a little bit more volatile because what if they finish logging and then the town, kind of starts dying? Well, that doesn't mean I can't buy a building there for pennies on the dollar. hold it for a year, and then sell it for, double that I bought it for, or hold it for 2 years and then sell it for double that I bought it for. Just based on appreciation and rental increase and a good market. But what I would caution against is buying in those one employment towns and saying, well, this is going to be for my children and my children's children, and I'm going to hold this for 100 years. I would say if you're doing that, if that's your strategy, let's look in Hamilton. Let's look downtown Toronto, right? Let's look in a market where that's a solid market and that property will always appreciate. So no matter who the buyer is, what your scenario is, there's a small town strategy for each of them. Yeah.
Maybe one day we're going to have the conversation about just talking about the small town strategy. So for those who will be interested, we're going to make a list on that. Jacob, I do appreciate your time. We do not have a question but right now.
Yeah.
But if usually people will get the question back. So I will send that to you and then we're going to send them the answer. I appreciate your time. Thank you for joining me today to have this conversation and to bring awareness about this amazing opportunity that exists again. Yes. So if you are interested, we are in the team where we work out every area of real estate. Anything that you think about, you don't think about it, we are there to help you get to that level. So if anything, let us know. Jacob, thank you so much. And then I will put your contact information to send to the people who register, alongside the cash flow analyst information and the good broadcast that you like to listen. So we can all listen and be aware and be a knowledgeable investor in that busy.
No, of course. And thank you so much for putting this on. It's been actually a really good time. I've had a blast. And my phone's always on. Send me a text message, give me a call. If I don't answer, I'll get back to you as soon as possible. But this is what we do. This is what our passion is. And, if you're working with Umu and you want to talk about more multifamily, let's get on a Zoom call together or let's meet in person. I again, love talking about this stuff. I'm sure you've heard enough from me now, but I feel like I've been rambling all night, but hopefully I've given everybody some immense value. And again, all of that stuff will be there to download and get.
For sure. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And then we wish you a wonderful evening. Think about it. Investing into real estate is investing into your future. And I always say we don't have that much land anymore. Land is getting expensive.
Very powerful message. Thanks. Bye, guys.